3 days. That's all the time I was gone. Just 3 days on a server migration gig in Austin, Texas. And when I finally pulled into my driveway at Oakwood Ridge Estates, dog-tired but relieved to be home, I saw her. Standing on the shore of my lake, pointing at the water like she was commanding the tide, was Veronica Hayes, the HOA president, our very own HOA queen bee. And beside her were two slick guys in brand-new khakis and polo shirts, clipboards in hand, measuring my shoreline with laser precision. But the shock didn't truly hit until I ran down the slope to my private gate, reached for the old, trustworthy lock, and found it was gone, replaced by a gleaming silver padlock stamped, mockingly, with Oakwood Security. My key didn't work. She had orchestrated this entire scheme while I was airborne, changing the locks, invading my property, and expecting me to quietly turn tail and disappear. She was wrong. So profoundly wrong. See, people tend to get unbelievably bold when they genuinely believe no one is watching them, and they were about to learn I wasn't just watching, I was recording. This wasn't just a patch of grass. This was Lake Serenity, 4.7 acres of water and thick woodland that had cost me every dime I'd saved since I started coding 15 years ago. I bought it 16 months prior, right after my divorce, and it was supposed to be exactly what the name said, my sanctuary. I remembered sitting on that dock the first evening, watching the sunset paint the water a deep, calming gold. That memory, that feeling of peace, flashed through my mind as I stood locked out, staring at the strangers who had invaded my quiet life. Veronica, I soon learned, had ruled Oakwood Ridge for 7 years, and she carried herself like someone for whom the word no had never been functionally applied. The two men with her were from premier lakefront assessors, and they treated my property like a staging area for their measurements. And there it was, planted right at the water's edge, a huge, ugly sign that screamed, "Premium waterfront parcel for sale. Contact Oakwood HOA." With Veronica Hayes' name in bold as the community representative. I pulled out my phone. My hands were actually steady, which surprised me. I kept the recording running as I focused on the sign, the men, and finally, Veronica's face. She noticed the lens and walked toward me, her surprise melting instantly into that practiced, patronizing smile. "Mr. Jensen," she said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "I'm Veronica Hayes, president of the association. You received our emails about the land reclassification, I assume." I told her I hadn't checked my email in 3 days. Her smile widened, treating my absence as some kind of useful confession. Well, that explains the unfortunate confusion. This lake, this entire parcel, actually, has been designated as community common property under HOA Resolution 2022-2005. We are currently accepting bids for its development. Mr. Smith and his associate here represent a major firm prepared to offer about $2.4 million for the water rights. I kept recording. "I own this lake, Veronica. The deed is filed with the county recorder, showing 4.7 acres, including the entire water surface. No HOA resolution can override a recorded deed. You know that is not how property law works in this state." I watched her eyes carefully as I said it, and there was a flicker, a momentary lapse in her composure. She knew. She knew the resolution was garbage, but she was betting I didn't have the legal understanding, or the fight, to challenge her. "Deeds can be amended, Mr. Jensen," she said smoothly, recovering instantly. "Community needs evolve. The association has the authority to reclassify underutilized private holdings for the greater good of all 150 households in this development." One of the assessors, Mr. Smith, nodded from my dock. "Beautiful property, Mrs. Hayes. The developer will move fast on this." He spoke as if I were 10 feet of irrelevant air, already erased from the transaction. I lowered my phone slightly, looking her straight in the eye. "You are trespassing. You changed my lock without authorization, you cut my fence to get in, and you planted a sign advertising the sale of property you do not own. I am calling the county sheriff's department right now to report criminal trespass and attempted fraud. I suggest you and your associates leave before they arrive." I pulled up the non-emergency line and started dialing. Her composure instantly shattered. She glanced wildly at the assessors, who were already scrambling to gather their equipment. "There is no need for that, Mr. Jensen. This is merely a misunderstanding about community procedures. We can discuss this at the next meeting." I held the ringing phone to my ear. There is nothing to discuss. Get off my property. Now. She stared at me for a long, silent moment, a look of pure, concentrated hatred, then spun around and stalked off toward the cut section of fence, gesturing sharply for the two men to follow. They moved quickly, gear tucked under their arms, suddenly looking desperate to be anywhere else. After I gave my statement to the dispatcher, I walked the perimeter of my fence, meticulously photographing the cut wire from multiple angles, timestamping every shot. I got a case number, but watching the deputy drive away, I knew a number on a clipboard wasn't justice. If I wanted my property back, I had to build my own case. And then I looked up at my house. Up under the eaves, perfectly positioned, were the 8 security cameras I had installed when I moved in. They were small, dark, and nearly invisible against the wooden trim. Veronica had never once looked up. She had no idea that for the past 3 days, those cameras had been recording every single visit she made to my property. I had a terrible feeling they had captured much more than just trespass. The next morning, I woke up to 45 new emails. Veronica had been busy. At 6 a.m., she had mass emailed all 150 households with the subject line, "Urgent Notice, Property Boundary Adjustment under Resolution 2022-2005. My lake was shaded bright blue on the attached map, labeled Common Area Amenity, pending administrative transfer." She explained that the board had voted unanimously to reclassify certain underutilized private parcels for community benefit. My name wasn't in the email, but every person in the neighborhood knew exactly whose lake she was talking about. She was making me the villain before I could even defend myself. I spent the next 2 hours on offense. First, the county recorder's office. The clerk confirmed my deed, parcel 51-3022-001, for 0.7 acres. Owner, John Jensen. She checked for HOA filings. Her answer was definitive. "Sir, an HOA cannot file a deed amendment without the owner's notarized consent. Whatever they are referencing, it is not in our system." Next, the public records portal. I searched every resolution Oakwood Ridge filed since 2020. I found the 4 legitimate resolutions, covering maintenance, paint colors, etc. There was no resolution 2022-2005. It did not exist. Veronica Hayes had not made a mistake. She had invented a fake legal instrument from thin air and broadcast it to the entire community as fact. My second discovery was the real jaw-dropper. Buried in the County Planning Commission's archives was a proposal from Cypress Point Development LLC for a 50-room boutique resort on the eastern edge of our community. The crucial phrase, exclusive waterfront access for guests. The county granted preliminary approval contingent on the developer securing legal access to a natural water source. Without my lake, the entire multi-million-dollar project was dead in the water. Then I searched the state business registry for Cypress Point Development LLC. The filing listed the founding members. I scrolled past the CEO, past the minority investors, and there it was, the name that made my stomach lurch. Veronica Hayes, 30% ownership. She had been HOA president for 7 years, long enough to know every vulnerable parcel. She incorporated her stake just months before the resort proposal. This wasn't for the greater good. This was a long con, and I was her last obstacle. That afternoon, I requested a meeting at the HOA office. The receptionist told me Veronica was unavailable and all disputes must go to the Dispute Resolution Committee. I asked who chaired it. She checked her computer. "Mrs. Hayes, sir." Of course. Before I even reached my car, I got an email from the HOA's legal counsel, a threat disguised as a form letter, warning me that failure to cooperate could result in fines of $500 per day. She was building a paper trail to make me look like the rogue element. I drove straight to the electronics store and bought a digital voice recorder, the kind disguised as a pen. If she wanted a war of documentation, I would meet her with irrefutable, untamperable evidence. When I got home, I logged into my security system. The first file loaded slowly, timestamped Tuesday, 2:14 p.m., less than 6 hours after my flight departed. Veronica walked into the frame, used the cut fence, and sat on the wooden bench by my dock. She spread papers across her lap, and I leaned closer to the screen, my heart pounding, because what I saw next wasn't trespass. It was criminal. She spent several minutes practicing signatures on a blank sheet, then pulled out an official-looking document and signed it with a chilling, confident motion. She had no nervousness, no hesitation. She believed no one would ever see this. But my camera caught every second in high definition. I saved the files immediately. This was forgery. I immediately called Arthur Sterling, the best property lawyer in the city, charging $400 an hour. I showed him the footage, the fake resolution, the Cypress Point connection, and her 30% ownership. His expression hardened. "Mr. Jensen," he said, leaning back in his chair. "This is multiple felonies, forgery, fraud, conspiracy. If that document purports to transfer your land, she is looking at state prison time. You understand the power you have here. Are you prepared to use it?" I told him I was. He drafted a formal criminal referral to the State Bureau of Real Estate and revised my cease and desist letter, adding a specific, veiled reference to the forgery footage. We sent copies to Veronica, the entire board, and the HOA's lawyer. The clock was now ticking louder than ever. 72 hours later, Veronica responded with a counterpunch, another mass email announcing an emergency HOA meeting to discuss the obstruction caused by a non-cooperative property owner. She named me directly, claiming my refusal was blocking a project that would deliver projected utility fee rebates of $18,000 per household. She painted me as the selfish newcomer, standing in the way of prosperity for the entire community. My phone immediately filled with hostile texts from neighbors I barely knew. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I drove down to my property, used the narrow back trail through the woods, the path she didn't know about, and walked out to the shore. I pulled the huge "for sale" sign from the ground, photographed it as evidence, and stored it in my garage alongside the forgery hard drives. Then, I installed a massive, heavy-duty steel padlock on the main gate. If she wanted access to my property again, she would have to cut the fence a second time. And this time, I would be ready. 5 days later, she played her boldest hand. I received a certified letter from the county recorder's office, informing me that a claim had been filed against my property. The document was titled, "Transfer of Easement Rights and Water Access," bearing a date of September 2017, months before I even bought the land. According to this fake instrument, the previous owner, a kind man named Alfred Stone, had voluntarily transferred all water rights to the HOA for a nominal fee of $1. The signature looked neat, the notary seal authentic. Alfred Stone had died in 2020. He was not alive to deny it. I called Arthur Sterling immediately. "This is a fabricated transfer instrument," he confirmed. "She's trying to cloud your title for years, creating enough confusion that you're forced to settle or give up. You need to find someone who can authenticate Alfred Stone's signature, and fast." We had less than 4 weeks before the document would be officially incorporated into the public record. It took me 2 frantic days to find Clara Stone, Alfred's only daughter, living 2 hours away. I found her through an obituary archive and explained the situation. She called back the next morning. When I told her about the document, she went quiet. "My father never signed anything like that," she finally said. In 2017, the HOA offered him $250,000 for that lake. He turned them down flat. He said that water was his reason for living there. That was everything. I asked for samples of his authentic signature. She scanned them over. Alfred Stone's real signature was sharp and strong, with a distinct upward curl on the final letter. The signature on Veronica's transfer document was rounder, shaky, almost practiced, a clear mismatch. I sent both sets to Arthur, and he engaged a forensic handwriting expert immediately. The net was tightening fast. I filed a formal criminal complaint with the county sheriff's office the next morning. Detective Elena Rodriguez was assigned to the case. She reviewed the materials, the forgery video, the signature comparisons, Clara Stone's sworn statement, and her expression turned grim. "This is no longer civil, Mr. Jensen. If the handwriting analysis confirms this, we are looking at forgery and attempted felony theft. Those carry prison sentences." I signed a complaint. The words "criminal investigation" changed the whole game. Detective Rodriguez called me a few days later. The forensic analysis was conclusive. The signature was definitively forged. But she had also uncovered something else, something far darker. During background checks, she found Veronica had executed similar access claims against 3 other parcels in Oakwood Ridge over the past year. 2 belonged to snowbirds, frequently absent. I was just the first one who fought back. But the third case chilled me to the bone. Mrs. Dorothy Vance, an 85-year-old widow living in an assisted care facility 100 miles away. With no family nearby, Veronica had changed the locks on her gate, installed HOA signage, and quietly rented out Mrs. Vance's backyard to a wedding event company for private parties. Detective Rodriguez obtained bank records showing deposits of thousands of dollars per month flowing directly into an account controlled by Veronica personally, not the HOA's general fund. For months, Veronica had been collecting rent on property she didn't own from a frail, elderly woman too unaware to notice. This wasn't HOA politics. This was a systematic predator exploiting the vulnerable. The cracks in Veronica's authority began to show instantly. Word of the criminal probe spread. A group of households, led by David Chun, a retired auditor, sent a formal letter to the board demanding an extraordinary meeting to review Veronica's conduct. The letter cited undisclosed conflicts of interest and misuse of funds. The meeting was set for the following Thursday. The breakthrough, the final nail, came on Wednesday evening. I was at the community clubhouse to pick up some bylaws. The conversation was clearly audible through a partially open door. Veronica was on speakerphone with Michael King, the CEO of Cypress Point Development. I reached into my shirt pocket and hit the record button on the pen I'd been carrying for weeks. King's voice was stressed. The Planning Commission is asking questions. We need confirmation of water rights in 5 days. If we don't have that lake, Cypress Point is finished. Veronica's response was ice. Then we make him want to leave. I will send people in at night. Damage the dock. Hit the boathouse if necessary. A few incidents like that, and he'll be desperate to sell. King's reply was utterly devoid of emotion. Do what you need to do. I don't care how. I stood frozen, the pen in my pocket recording every word. They were planning the coordinated destruction of my private property. I drove home, my mind racing. The smart move was to hand the recording to Detective Rodriguez. But there was another possibility. If she was sending people to my property tonight, I could catch them in the act, mid-crime. The evidence I already had was enough to convict, but catching them in the act would make it impossible to deny. The extraordinary HOA meeting took place the next evening. David Chun met me at the door. 110 households had sent representatives. Veronica sat at the front table, rigid and professional, despite the buzzing tension. When the agenda reached the motion for leadership review, David Chun read the petition aloud. Then, Mrs. Dorothy Vance's grandnephew stood up, having driven all night. His voice shook with anger as he described how Veronica had stolen rent money from his great-aunt for months. My aunt trusted this community. You betrayed that trust for money. Veronica stood up, her chair scraping the floor. I have served this community for 7 years. You take the word of a newcomer over 8 years of service. The room remained silent. No one spoke in her defense. David Chun called for the vote. No confidence in the current HOA president. Immediate removal pending a full audit. The count was 95 in favor, 15 opposed. Veronica Hayes was no longer in charge of anything. I thought that was the climax. I was wrong. 2 hours later, 4 men in matching gray polo shirts appeared at my front gate, wearing patches that read Oakwood Community Patrol. They pounded on the gate, shouting that I was required to vacate the lake area. I called 911. The responding officers found the men were just landscapers, paid $250 each by Veronica personally. They were arrested for impersonating security personnel and trespass. Her desperate attempt to reassert control had only supplied Detective Rodriguez with more evidence. I met with Detective Rodriguez the next morning and handed over the final piece of the puzzle, the voice recording of the conspiracy. She told me we had enough for immediate arrest on forgery and fraud, but she asked if I was willing to assist with a controlled operation to catch the sabotage team tonight. My role would be limited to observation. I agreed. The setup was precise. I created an alibi at a nearby hotel, then returned on foot through the backwoods, slipping into my boathouse as darkness fell. My phone was connected to the live feed from my 8 security cameras. At 11:32 p.m., the sound of tires on gravel broke the silence. My phone buzzed, vehicle spotted. Hold position. I watched the camera feed. Shadows appeared near the north fence line. 2 figures, then 3, then 4. One carried something heavy. I saw the metallic snap of wire cutters. I texted Rodriguez, moving. Then, a 5th figure emerged from the shadows behind them. Even in the low-res night vision, I recognized the silhouette. Veronica Hayes had come to supervise the destruction personally. I texted, 5 on property. Hayes confirmed. I stayed frozen in the boathouse window as the group gathered at the water's edge. Veronica's voice carried across the still water, sharp and commanding. Start with the dock supports. Make it look like storm damage. Then dump everything in the water. One of the men raised a sledgehammer and swung. Crack. The sound of splintering would echoed through the night. I felt the sound in my chest like a physical blow. The first police lights appeared 30 seconds later, converging on the access points from 3 directions. The group on the dock froze. Michael King, the CEO, broke into a run, but 2 officers intercepted him. The workers dropped their tools immediately. Veronica was the last to react. She stood motionless at the edge of my dock, staring at the approaching officers. Detective Rodriguez reached her first. Veronica Hayes, you are under arrest. She recited the charges: forgery, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted destruction of property. This is private HOA business. You have no jurisdiction here. Veronica shrieked, her voice frantic. Rodriguez simply applied the handcuffs. I stepped out of the boathouse. Patrol cars arrived with full lights. The noise brought neighbors out of their homes. 30 residents gathered along the fence line, their faces illuminated by the rotating emergency lights. The woman who had controlled their community for 7 years was being escorted off my private property in handcuffs. As the officer led her past the crowd, Veronica saw the neighbors watching. Something in her broke. She twisted against the officer and screamed toward the silent faces. You think you won something? The resort would have brought millions. And what did he give you? Nothing. $10 million. You people threw it away for him. She was still yelling when they put her in the back seat and closed the door. 3 months later, the legal system delivered its verdict. Veronica Hayes pleaded guilty to reduced felony charges, avoiding a full trial only because the evidence was overwhelming. She received 6 years in state prison, followed by 4 years of supervised probation. She was ordered to pay restitution totaling $175,000 to her victims, including Mrs. Vance. She was permanently barred from holding any fiduciary position. Michael King received 4 years as a co-conspirator. The resort company was dissolved. 2 weeks after the sentencing, the HOA held its first meeting under new leadership. David Chun was elected president. They immediately passed 3 new amendments to the CCNRs, prohibiting board members from holding financial interests in community projects, requiring annual independent audits, and explicitly stating the HOA had no authority over private property. It was not a revolution. It was a clear, necessary correction. I received official confirmation from the county recorder's office a few weeks later. The forged transfer document was permanently rejected and marked as fraudulent in the public record. My deed remained exactly as it was, for 0.7 acres, including Lake Serenity, owned solely by John Jensen. That weekend, I drove to the hardware store and bought a new, custom-engraved padlock. I walked down to the gate, removed the old lock from the conflict, and replaced it. I mounted a simple sign, private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Then, I walked to the dock, sat in my chair, and cast a fishing line into the still water. My lake, my land. The law had protected it. The truth had defended it. And now, finally, I could simply enjoy it. Veronica thought she could steal what was not hers. She was wrong. Evidence doesn't lie. Justice, though slow, eventually arrives, and people who abuse power will always face the consequences. If you've ever experienced HOA injustice or know someone who has, please share your story in the comments below. Let me know, did I do the right thing by taking it all the way to a criminal prosecution? Or should I have accepted a settlement? What's the worst HOA abuse you've ever seen? Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and never stop defending what's yours.